Welcome back to Tales from the Attitude Era. I am your host, Rob Pasbani, joined as always by the former head writer of WWF during the most successful period in pro wrestling history. Of course, the great Tommy Blacha is with me. Tommy, welcome.
Thank you. Hi. Hi, guys.
We're on week 2 of your WWF journey on the road to your first pay-per-view, No Mercy, which is this coming Sunday. But we have one more stop before No Mercy, which is Smackdown. And Smackdown at this time was taped Tuesdays, the day after Raw, and would air on Thursdays, as opposed to its current airing on Fridays. So you'd have a nice 2-day window to edit things down. How is a Smackdown taping different than a Raw taping typically?
Well, a Smackdown taping, a Raw is live, which is always kind of the best for a lot of reasons. One, there's nothing better than when the show's over, it's already aired. You don't have to edit. You don't have to overthink. You don't have to do anything. And so there is also like a level of everyone kind of innately knows you can't screw up, or if you screw up, you fold it in somehow. There's no, we can get that later. It's just like a human nature thing where things tend to not lag, promos are sharper, that especially if Monday Night Raw, you go to the next city, there's a little bit of an exhale. Not like they don't bring it, but it's just like, okay, it's not quite the intensity of live, but you also get some advantages through editing. You get to be like, oh, we can pull that up. So just watching this show, I was like, wow, it's just like boom, boom, boom. Things can be tightened a little, and the show's just relentless. And this was a specifically good one. Also, leading up to the pay-per-view, there was so much stuff to get into, and just the advantage of how you assembled and created the show was like, now we go over here, and remember this next week, this is going to pay off, and now here, and now here, and now this, and now this, and it was just like boom, boom. That was just a relentless show. It was pretty intense.
Now, do you find yourself a little more drained by the time you get to SmackDown? Like you already see the finish line for the week. SmackDown is essentially the end of the work week, basically, right? Because you typically do Sunday, Monday, Tuesday with a pay-per-view in there. Or is it like just as excited as for Raw?
I guess you're just as excited. It's still the same thing. You still got the same amount of work. And in fact, I have to do a little shout out to Sunday Night Heat, which was taped before SmackDown. So while Raw was a little easier in the sense that you had everything ready to go, and once it's going, and it's on TV live, and then when it's over, it's already aired. It's incredible, and then you really marvel at the machine, and you're like, wow, the arena live gate is paid for all this production, and the show is on and made so much money, and now we're driving to the next town. It's like brilliant. Where this is a little bit more like TV, like, okay, that'll work, and we got to edit this. But at the same time, you just hand it off to the studio, and when you watch it, you see all the things that were like pulled up, and you just see how like more exciting it possibly is. The confusing thing a little bit was Sunday Night Heat was taped before SmackDown, but it would air after. It would air to the next, so sometimes you're like
Sunday,
the following Sunday. So you're juggling things in your mind, and they're just changing the ring apron to say like Sunday Night Heat. And then I swear to you, generally speaking, for the most time I was there, Michael Hayes and I and others sometimes would write Sunday Night Heat on a yellow pad of paper in 10 minutes after the production meeting for the SmackDown show. And he'd be there like, okay. And a lot of times it was like, okay, who's left? And then we just book it that way. But the machine was so great, and the roster was so great. And it's just like, who do we got? Blackman and Funaki. And sometimes it seemed like more like house show matches. So if you're a fan of wrestling and the matches, sometimes I loved the Sunday Night Heat matches. And also, no one kind of gave a shit about what you're doing. And I got to do like some fun stuff with like the APA and Funaki, like this whole theme that ran through the whole show, and like, yeah, we're gonna do this and that, and no one, like, I don't want to say no one cared, but you just had carte blanche to just like put a show out. And it was just so fun to see Michael Hayes at the end of that production meeting where you got to peel off and do everything, and like, come on, we got to do Sunday Night Heat. Who's left? How about this? How about that? Yeah, go. It was just reminding me of being in one of those stupid cooking shows. You got 10 minutes to make a meal out of, this, and this. And often they were great. And Sunday Night Heat was huge then. And then if you see, like, especially leading up to a pay-per-view, which now, those became
I guess you didn't have to book
too.
Sunday Night Heat this week because the Heat would have been live right before the pay-per-view this week, right?
Well, often you'd book matches and sometimes ones would be cut. But for this one, you'd know, like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of video packages leading to the pay-per-view. And then the studio, and that's another thing about the machine, how great it was, because you'd know, the studio is going to do all kinds of great packages and voiceover stuff that you didn't even have to worry about or care about. And later you'd watch and go like, oh, that was awesome. Or, sometimes there'd be even B-roll from different interviews or certain things that you could, like, cherry pick and see, like, oh, we can save that, or we can throw that to Sunday Night Heat if it's before there. So there's a lot of mental juggling, here and there. But like I said, that machine was so incredible. Then people from the studio, back in Stamford would be like, hey, how about this? Or we assembled this because of this. And you'd kind of either sometimes give them direction, or you'd just, Kevin Dunn would come up with something with whoever, and or you'd just see, oh, okay, that's what happened. It was a lot of you knew where you were going, so it wasn't like big surprises or left turns that are gonna screw anyone over. So it was exciting.
So I'm curious now, what was the schedule for the production, like the booking? Like, when was Raw booked? And then when was SmackDown booked after it? I know this is a very
in cars on pads. No, so basically you'd have you'd come off of Tuesday, and Wednesday would be a travel day, and then Thursday. And this was the first era of emailing things in, because I used to drive to Stamford. It was like from Manhattan. It was like, oh, that's a pain, and with Gewurz too, or Gewurz would meet there. But then we started to say, so this is 1999, and it seems ridiculous to say, but it wasn't prevalent to be like, can we just email each other? And can we, do it that way over email? Like, some ideas for the the following booking the week, and then we'd all like look at everything and kind of create rundowns and send them to Vince or whoever to look over.
When was the rundown created? When was that? Well, like, what day of the week?
Oh, we'd start doing that on Thursday,
okay.
and it wasn't so like deadline here. It was just, send things in on Friday, and things were, sometimes you'd have the rundown and you wouldn't know, like, is this good? Did he tear the rundown up? Is it going to change? So you were just, it was like being an intern in an emergency room. You're just on call, you know what I mean?
And you're working through the weekend too, right? Like, the rundowns are still being decided over the weekend.
Absolutely. Yeah,
absolutely.
Of course. Yeah. So, and then sometimes they'd go and sometimes you'd redo it. Sometimes Vince would kibosh all of it, and then you'd reassemble it, and then you'd end up being like, this is almost exactly like it was on Thursday. Well, everything like that, so it was.
So theoretically, you have a loose idea of what's happening on both Raw and SmackDown by Friday. Would that be safe to say?
Sure. And ideally, storylines are going. And you always have some ideas of like, okay, we're working towards a pay-per-view, but things, are always changing. So sometimes, a lot of it was like, what are we going to do with Austin? Or if Austin, has an injury, or how would we keep him alive? And, so you're throwing out a bunch of ideas. So you're making rundowns, and you're also like giving alternate ideas, and then you kind of find out late, okay, here's what it's going to be. And often, what was so amazing about that machine, there was times going in to a city Monday morning going like, people like, what am I doing? What are we doing? I don't know yet. We don't know yet. And especially in that era, because it's one thing to be like, the whole roster's there. They got their outfits. You're booking matches. They're in the ring. That's easy. But this era was a lot of like, maybe we should, crash the ambulance into the wall. Yeah, do it. Fuck, it's 10:30 a.m. We got to do this by 4. Oh, go get, to our magic man, Richie Posner. Oh, I got to order this. Some people from the audience or from the office, can we order an ambulance or some weird thing to blow up? Oh, the fire marshal's going to be here. Oh, you got to put this stuff on the sewers because the gas can go down. I don't know. Is this going to be possible? The stuff you just pull off always by the seat of your pants was kind of like amazing sometimes with this whole like machine. And then you'd be like, oh no, we did pull that off. That just means Vince will want more next time. But that's what made it so exciting. And that's why I made this particular era so great, because there was this competition with WCW and everyone was pulling out all the stops in every direction. And you had 3-hour shows where you were like, it's not just about a good match, it's about all kinds of shenanigans. It's about all kinds of backstage interviews, and it's about someone's got to go through a plate glass window. You know, the stakes were huge for different kinds of of things. You know, even on this particular SmackDown, doing like, oh, we're gonna do a gimmick where Triple H is bit by the snake. You know, and
yeah,
and things like
yeah.
that,
Well, there's a few gimmicks here. We could talk about it.
Sure.
It's interesting. One other thing I wanted to ask is like, you came in and you're coming in mid angle, like all of these stories are in the middle right now, and you're taking over Vince Russo's stories. I guess, you could argue they're Vince McMahon stories that Vince Russo wrote, whatever they may be. You're coming in halfway. Did you find that easier because things were already established, or was it more difficult to use somebody else's setups?
Kind of easier, I guess, because, easier or harder is based on how much Vince liked the angle or how smooth things were going and how everyone agreed to it, regardless of where it came from. You know what I mean? Is working it into shape or out of shape. So, I always want to like get that point across as there's just this like machine in place. So you throw an angle out there, it's like a football play. It's kind of like, who came up with the X's and O's? Yeah, but the guy either fumbled, oh, that play's bad. Not necessarily, or they scored a touchdown for some other reason, or it's a broken play, to use as a flawed analogy. So it was always like that. So it really was, I never looked at my ideas being precious or even mine in that sense. It was just like, you're using, like, when Michael Hayes and I would write Sunday Night Heat, it's like, what do we got? And you'd come up with the angles. Some angles were like, this one's pre-thought out and, oh, this is good, we're working towards this. But a good majority of it is like flying by the seat of your pants. And then also, something goes off to the agent and, the wrestlers themselves, and then comes back with a different idea or something you might not even know, like, hey, how about this? Or in that production meeting, they throw a wrinkle on it, so you really got to understand that. And sometimes a lot of things were like, oh, it doesn't matter who goes over, like you're always trying to, as an example, protect people. Like when the New Age Outlaws lost the tag titles to Rock and Sock, a lot of people like, oh, the titles. No one was a mark for the titles. That didn't matter. It didn't matter that they lost the titles, but you don't want them to just lose the titles and then go flat. So that's why, like, oh, the Hollies should come in and, attack them. And then there's their feud. Because philosophically, I think if you're not chasing a title or on that way, you should be involved in a feud or some kind of side thing, so everyone has heat. And so they don't look, so just those fundamentals are always in play, and you're always trying to like tweak things to that point. So sometimes that's on the fly and not all arranged, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get into it since you spoiled the ending here.
Yeah.
I assume our viewers
spoiled the ending of the thing documented 25 years ago.
Yeah, a 25-year-old episode of SmackDown. And so this is a very interesting. What I really enjoyed about watching this is seeing the parallels to how you booked Raw. For example, on Raw, it was, it's X-Pac and Kane against the Acolytes is the feud. On Raw, X-Pac faced Farouk. On SmackDown, Kane faces both Acolytes in a handicap match. I really like those kind of parallels that you threw in here
Right.
to give the continuity. And so we kick the show off with Mick Foley. Mick Foley asks Vince for one more night with the Rock and Sock connection. And the Rock and Sock connection gimmick has been incredible. I think it really propelled Rock to the next level, because having him work with Mick, and everybody loves Mick. Mick is the everyman, and begrudgingly accepting him, and then ultimately defending him, even though he doesn't like him, really created a new sympathy for The Rock that we didn't really see before. He was sort of a one-dimensional asshole that the fans seem to love no matter what. And then the New Age Outlaws come out, and they do their shtick.
Well, let me talk first about that a little bit. Like, just just that, to put Mick Foley over, you just knew you had a segment like, okay, Mick Foley and Vince, it's like, it's going to be a good segment. You don't have to worry about it. If you have lines to throw them or whatever, they're going to work it out. They're so good. And Mick Foley's just the ultimate. Like I said, he's gaga. He's got heat when he wants. He's fierce. He can be a champion. He can be a goofball. He can fuck things up. He's just he was the ultimate go-to guy. And you're right. When just him and The Rock, what a weird dynamic, which I always found like that's great when you can get a weird dynamic between, a tag team that's entertaining. You're almost like, oh my God, the minutes are going by and they haven't even had any physicality. It doesn't matter because they're so fun and they're so odd. And I always like the tension too of a tag team that's successful that doesn't really want to be together, or like, it's kind of the analogy. Players that hate each other, but oh my God, they're on the championship team. That's just, always like fun and intriguing. So that always sets a tone for Vince being in a good mood because the segment's working good. And also like it's good, frankly, at the time to be like, oh, cool, Vince has a few things to work on and he's not like, I'm going to get on that idea. Yeah. It was always best like, oh, Vince is wrestling. Oh, and he's got a bunch of promos. Cool. And then, everything runs by itself in a way. So to speak.
And so I was very excited for this. I remember that it's so funny. Like I haven't watched this in 25 years, but I knew where this was going, and I was so excited because I love the Rock and Sock connection. And like I said, at this point in time, Mankind is my top guy in WWE. As much as I loved Austin, as much as I love the Rock, I was a Mankind guy, so it was great. And then the New Age Outlaws come out. They do their call and response, and if anybody ever asks you, were the Outlaws ever over? All you got to do is just show them this video.
Oh, I don't even think
Road Dogg didn't even have to finish his line. Like the crowd was saying it for him. Like that's how
it was unbelievable. And like I said, this was in Birmingham. You'd look at the last row of cheap seats. They're yelling to the top of their lungs, and the crowd's so engaged. Just that opening. Like of all the people with signs everywhere. And I think once we got, these into the mix a little bit, and I'm not, certainly not trying to be, God damn it, it's ruined stuff. But just, I don't know. I don't find crowds that engaged like they were at this time.
Great point.
They were so hot and it just enhanced everything. It enhanced everyone's want to do a better match. It enhanced the excitement of every match. It just did, and here you got an example of like those guys were so over. They came out, they did their call response. It was massive. Rock and Sock come out, they're over, and you're kind of like confused, like who's heels? What does it matter? Like, I don't know.
There's a lot of blending here with the heels and faces, especially in these top angles. So because the Outlaws come out, they do their shtick. They don't really have a direction officially yet for the night, and they get interrupted by their old friend, but someone who they're not quite friends with at the moment, Triple H, and he's there with China, and Triple H has a mark on his face from this past Monday because, of course, as the show ended, he was left locked in a room with a rattlesnake, and this is another one
behind a sheet of plexiglass. Not a lot of people know.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's a little Hollywood magic there.
That one shot, that was pretty. I remember like, that wasn't green screen. How did that? Oh, yeah. It was like shot through plexiglass and it was right there. It was pretty good.
Ah, interesting. Okay, yeah. So this was another case of the higher resolution of modern TVs kind of killing the gimmick because this looked like the cheapest zombie makeup on Triple H's face. It looked, but I'm sure at the time on a CRT screen, it did not look that way. It looked like a bruise or whatever.
Sure. And here's what's going on too. There was some makeup shenanigans here and there. Like I'm coming out, dressed as Vince, or no, I've got Triple H's nose. And so it was one of those things that just like, okay, once the decree comes down, that's what we're going with, and I can't remember exactly how that came about. Like, how about like Triple H gets, bit by the snake or whatever. And then it's like, didn't quite expect that face thing. But I think a lot of people were, which was the great thing about wrestling at that time, was like, what is this? Is this, almost didn't ruin it. People didn't exactly just, feel like, oh, that's not real. They're trying to pull that over my face. There were so many double swerves and people doing things that people were like, is he, everyone, is he going to turn on him? What is this? Where is this going? That was still and also that these shows were so hot. You're shoehorning things in segments where you're like, this is segment, this is going to be hot. We're going to shoehorn this in. That's going to happen later. No, look out. No, over here. Like, wait, what? So I hear you and I don't disagree, but
that's a good point though, because yes, even the cheap makeup can add to the viewer's enjoyment, because you're asking, is this a gimmick, like even
right.
within the kayfabe, is this intentionally bad makeup to draw Austin out? So right. I agree, it didn't detract from the story at all, and I thought Triple H did an incredible job giving this melodramatic promo about how he wants to retire. He reminded me of Terry Funk a little bit. How he kept going like, "Look at me, look at my face, look at my face."
Yeah. Oh, maybe he borrowed that from, homage to Terry Funk.
It just reminded me of the empty arena match where Terry Funk kept going, my eye, Gordon Soley.
I know back in the day, I've heard stories. I can't remember exactly who, like some kind of gimmick, like some wrestler was burned at some studio wrestling, Mid-Atlantic or somewhere. And they just had his, some ring rat just sucked on his face and gave his face hickeys. Just so it could be like the next day, like, oh, it's real, but is it? What is that? Or how exactly does that work? Or you could beat someone with a bag of oranges. You ever hear that one? Put an orange in a sock. It's old. It's old insurance work. So if you get like a orange in like a pantyhose or a sock, and you beat someone, you can bruise them all up, but not really damage their body. So then they can go for insurance scam, like, look at me, I'm all bruised. But it's like, well, you're not really hurting them.
Thankfully, kayfabe has evolved where people just accept makeup now. You don't have to actually physically bruise the person.
And I think also you're right. HD looks worse in the arena. People, you can't really.
Yeah, you can't tell. Yeah.
And
no, I was like, this is only with a modern television that you could see how this looks, because you absolutely would not be able to see that. So essentially, Triple H says he's going to retire tonight, and he's going to hand over the belt to Austin.
Right.
Which, what wrestler has ever said that they were going to do that? What a wuss! Sure. What a coward! You don't want that.
And everyone knows too, like, that's not going to happen. But what's going to happen? I think that's the vibe of this whole.
It's a good hook.
Angle.
It's a good hook for the show. Then, as I mentioned with the parallel booking earlier, it's a time for Kane's match against the Acolytes on Monday. X-Pac told Kane that he wants to handle Farouk on his own, and for Kane to stay backstage. So here on SmackDown, Kane tells X-Pac the exact same thing. And I forgot that this is as Kane just recently started talking, as they're trying to make him more human. A few weeks back, he said his first words, which were "suck it."
Yep.
This is a great moment for Kane. I feel like they're really getting him over as a personality more than just Undertaker's brother. And I like that he's sort of kept away from Undertaker. I guess Undertaker's not around right now, but
and also just to reiterate, sometimes there's one thing to be like getting these guys over, and what are they doing? It gets these guys over. All four of them, X-Pac, Kane, Bradshaw, and Ron Simmons, is just, they're fucking unbelievable. You see them live, and you see them, you're just like, oh, I'll watch that match every day. They're just physically just unbelievable performers, and it's stiff, and X-Pac can, at his size, and he's got like whatever. He's lived 80% of his life as a pro wrestler. I think he started when he was 15 or whatever, and he's just like, for a smaller guy to be interesting in that, because a lot of times that doesn't work too good. And he's incredible. So that alone is like, when you book something like that, like Kane, Acolytes, okay, it'll be fine. Just get him a reason, and whatever.
So it's Kane versus the Acolytes in a handicap match. This is a 4-minute and 29-second match, and it is awesome.
Yeah,
it is.
That's the point I'm trying to say. Often handicap match, huge guy, big men, 4 minutes 29 seconds. You could be like lumbering. Not these guys. It's
this
just
was great.
Wow,
these some stiff power bombs to Kane.
Yeah.
And the thing with the handicap match, the psychology of it is it's a little weird because if the tag team loses, it's 2 against 1. If the tag team loses, like they're wusses. They look like total wusses, you know. But I feel
unless, there's always an unless.
Unless it was
one person's fault and the other one, and they had heat between them, or something.
Right. Yes, if there's some sort of mistake that leads to the ending. Sure. But in general, I feel like the right person, the right people here won, because if Kane on his own beat the Acolytes, what's the point of the tag match at the pay-per-view on Sunday? Because it's like Kane can beat him on his own. He doesn't need X-Pac.
And this was starting my favorite thing, which I was a big proponent of and worked on a lot, was, hey, the APA, I always thought it was interesting. I pitched, not necessarily with them, but like there should be someone who just wants to get paid and doesn't care about titles and doesn't care about anything, just is open to the top bidder to influence matches through whatever reason. And that fit perfectly in the Acolytes, and they stopped like kind of putting the symbols. They kind of morphed away from that into the APA.
Yeah.
And this was kind of part of that, like, oh, if you want to have a punishment, you have to face the APA. Oh, why did the APA help this person? Oh, they gave him beer money. Oh, so you can have heat with them. I don't want heat with them. So they're always backstage. You know, that started that whole thing, which was
I really like. I love that. I love that. Yeah, that was a great character arc for them, and you could see that. You could see it's interesting because you see it also with Viscera and Mideon. There's still these little remnants of the Ministry of Darkness, but the Undertaker is injured. He's gone. He's on the shelf. So they're sort of directionless, trying to find their new gimmicks. And like with the Acolytes as well, like you really see that they've outgrown the supernatural stuff, and they're just basically 2 badass tough guys. Like I can't believe, I can't speak enough about how much I enjoyed watching them beat the crap out of Kane here and those power bombs.
And that's the great thing about these tremendous hours of programming in wrestling, where it is like a soap opera. Like if you watch a soap opera and you start to break down the characters, you're like, that character had 10. Well, remember, they used to be a prostitute, and then this, and then they were in a coma. And then it's just like so much stuff that's preposterous. And wrestling does that too. Like, well, you know, they used to be a supernatural part of the Ministry of Darkness, and Satan worship. That's over. Now they're you know what I mean? It's just, you got to just keep feeding that monster and changing, and you know that, you know, so it's a lot of that. That works, cool. That doesn't, goodbye. But and I did always love Mideon as, you know, the Acolytes intern. That didn't go far enough as far as I'm concerned. Sometimes you get sad. You're like, oh my God, there's so many ways that he has to, you know, had tons of pitches for that, but you know, some things are just, no, it's over. Fuck. Oh well. And that's the biz. But
and look, you made Kane look really strong. One more point I want to make: you made Kane look super strong, because the first power bomb he did kick out of. He was able to kick out of one brutal double power bomb, but then the second one, there's no kicking out. You know, so I really liked that. I really liked how everyone came out looking strong of the match.
Kane's unbelievable. I mean, Glenn Jacobs, it's just the human being is unbelievable. You know, I remember being in somewhere where there was some of the arenas will have a gym in it. Some don't, you know, locker room for, I think it was Dallas. The Mavericks had a weight room. And so the wrestlers were working out in there. And I saw Prince Albert, who's whatever, 310, huge guy, 6'8", came out of the gym and just with an astonished look on his face going like, you can't believe what Glenn's lifting in there. So when you see a guy 6'8", this big, astonishingly going, that guy's so strong. You're like, holy shit, what? But what a specimen. And you see in all the shenanigans of and performance enhancing things that I don't know, this, that, and the other, let's say, but that's a guy whose body hardly ever changed over 25 years. You know,
always consistently just shredded.
Just astonishing athlete. Would leave it at that. And
then we get a backstage segment where Mankind finds The Rock in a locker room, and it was, in fact, the emptiest locker room I've ever seen. They were the only 2 people in this locker room. It was just a giant blank room with one chair in it with The Rock's bag on it.
Right.
But what a great like the Rock is just on fire here, you know, like just so many great insults. Just this is peak Rock, peak moment of like, wow, the Rock is a superstar, you know. And I'm sure for you as well, it was like Mick try to convince Rock, and then they just did all the magic there.
Yeah, you just see if you know, like Gewirtz was involved in quite a lot of Rock stuff. So you throw him lines and whatever, but it's the dynamic when the dynamic works, and especially like in acting, I say acting's like reacting is the key. Not two people trying to get themselves over. So just that whole thing of Mick Foley, to me, it just like he's like the catalyst. So it's like this big annoying goofball who's it's like the set piece, if you will, is like, I'm the weird nerdy kid who wants to have the cool guy as my friend, and I'm cool, and then the cool guy is using the nerdy, it's just those dynamics. Yeah. So to just start to see Mick Foley blather on about anything, and then The Rock just give him that look, the dynamics were just so great. And it was like, oh, that guy's the coolest of cool guys with the look. And look at this guy. He can't even keep his shirt tucked in, and he's a slob, and he's you know what I mean? All that which has nothing to do with wrestling. These are just like time honored, you can probably find many movies from the 30s. Like, oh, there you go. It's that same dynamic. It just worked, and they plugged in incredibly well, and they could just go to, so easy to work that out, So you're just so happy that, oh, Rock and Sock Connection, that's going to work. That's easy,
Yeah. So the Mick is essentially asking for one more match. And The Rock agrees that this is the absolute last time that they will team together. And essentially, I believe this is where Mankind reveals that Vince McMahon promised him the match, and it is, he even set up The Rock here, because he goes, Mick, he goes, The Rock, don't you want to know who our opponents are? And The Rock goes, who are our opponents? And then Mick goes, well, our opponents are, it doesn't matter who our opponents. Like, yeah. Get it in there. Get it in there. Loved it. Loved it.
It's fun seeing some of these things. Was that the first time that was said? It's like Howard Stern, Baba Booey. Like, oh, that was the first one.
No, this was already an established bit, because I think he's
it was
his most famous one was when he did that to Jericho, which was a few weeks prior.
Right.
Speaking of Jericho, here he is breaking up with his heater already after 2 weeks, Mr. Hughes. Right. And this was a nothing match, but I don't know. I guess, were you trying to channel a little Ralphus here by bringing out the Fink, Howard Finkel?
Absolutely. It was funny. Like I said, I think, and I'm not sure on this, but I think, Russo definitely, I believe, was a catalyst in bringing in Jericho. I could be wrong, but I know, like I said before, if people remember the countdown where Jericho was introduced as Y2J, and for a long time it was just like, this numbers counting down. And when he got introduced, his music, him, like the perfect guy, like I said, people who were WWF diehards who maybe didn't know who he was were all immediately, through word of mouth in the arena, that's the guy for WCW. Now at WCW, and Jericho's interesting because he's got some real cred. He trained in Japan and definitely knew what he's doing, but he did have some like humor chops, Gaga chops, especially with Ralphus, if people remember that, and which I thought was great, because he was, Ralphus was like his bodyguard, a guy who had like a belly and ill-fitting shirt and was just a goofball. So it all worked pretty heavily, and I found Jericho was a very charismatic, smart aleck kind of guy that could be like also played the good cowardly heel thing, but I also had ability. So we were always like pushing him, and then I don't know, since you got to just go through some growing pains or whatever, or just Vince seemed to be not convinced about Jericho, so it's like, oh, what are we gonna do with him? But he, at the same time, he did wasn't quite pushing him. So definitely the Fink thing was a I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but certainly people like, oh, look, this is what worked great at WCW, and then like is obviously gimmick infringement, if you will, but and then like, oh yeah, the Fink, everyone loves the Fink and his weirdness. So it didn't quite gel, but it didn't matter because Jericho went off, and
Yeah, this is a very odd little moment for Jericho because he gets to WWE and he's kind of like pushed down the ranks almost instantly, and this is where we're at. And I feel this happened a lot with guys that jumped. You'd have to like prove yourself you'd have to get over all over again in WWE, and like I feel like they really made you eat crow and pay your dues for like 6 months before they gave you a look again, and I always felt like that was counterintuitive in terms of like getting the audience behind the wrestler, because to the audience, if they haven't seen Jericho in WCW, he just looks like a scrub.
I couldn't agree more. It was something I never was liked, because once he's your guy, he's your guy.
Yeah.
And you can make him the greatest thing in the world. There's a weird thing, and it's just maybe a holdover of old stuff and competitiveness between promoters or whatever. And, it certainly wasn't just Vince. We're like, okay, now you're here. Now if you're a mid guy here and you're a big guy there, that just makes our organization look that much stronger. And I would argue like, no, it doesn't, not really. And, and I've even heard same thing happened when Bret Hart went to WCW, which I thought was like a total missed opportunity with like, okay, let's just put him in the ranks a little bit. When after the Montreal Screwjob, when I'm like, that's one of the most high profile weird things. They should have just put him on top immediately, and
exactly.
Because then you're getting all the rub from the controversy from the other one, which is what the Outsiders did so incredibly when they went over, because people are still like, smart marks or pseudo smart marks are like, are they still working for WWF or this and that? So you're getting all your WWF, accolades and presenting them at the other one. And it's like, that all works. So
I think that's exactly why the NWO angle works so well at first. You really like, some people really thought, I think the reason they didn't do that with Bret Hart is because Hogan knew that and he didn't want to give up his spot.
Yeah. But even they could have done something more, and it's not even about just the spot. They should have just done some things more high profile, even if they were there's ways to stall people or bury them high profile, hurt them, whatever, you know what I mean? And not just like, let them flounder, so to speak.
So then we see a Big Show talking about his father, the beginning of this angle. And was this something that was already established, or was this something that you came up with, this Big Show father angle?
No, this was just like a lot of things. Sometimes I watch these shows and remember like, I didn't even watch half this show because I was off doing whatever kind of things. But it was just, as I remember it, just presented. And a lot of times things will come up between wrestlers and agents, or they go, end around. So I was just presented by Vince, and it was like, Big Show's dad died of cancer, and and he doesn't mind putting that in this angle. And we're thinking of something maybe where, the Big Show could like torture him, tease him about his father's. And I don't know if it was matter of fact, but something like that. And which shows like, or things were thrown out there in a meeting and to be like, oh, what do you think of something like that? And it was like, oh, that's great. Because I was always looking for something that was long-term, and also where you could have someone like the Big Show who, it's a problem if he's not going after a title, if he's not competitive getting in the title. So you always want to do something where like, why isn't he going after a title? Because he's embroiled in this heated feud with a guy that's so sinister, that's teasing him about his dad. And then you could make him lose because it's like, it's just inside his head. So you don't diminish the character. You just are like, poor guy. And you could even have the, as we talked it out, you could have the big boss man beat him a lot, and he's not going to look weak because at some point he's going to shake it off. And then it's like, look out. He's shaking off this guy, torturing him. So I was always looking for those wrinkles to keep guys hot, even while they're losing. You know what I mean? And not, that's
the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. When you don't want guys just, and 1, 2, 3. And now I go to the back and like, well, I guess I'm back to the drawing board kind of thing.
So this was always the angle. It's just, it wasn't putting the world title in it. That just happened because Austin got injured.
Right. Yeah. And that always was, kind of like malleable. And sometimes you'd be surprised of like, well, let's put it on. And often, there's a whole saying you shouldn't be a mark for the title. And a lot of times guys were like, I don't want the title because I just literally don't want to carry it through the airports all the time because they have to, you know what I mean?
Right, they're heavy, yeah.
Yeah. That was an old like tradition, and then I think they started like, why don't they just go with the trucks, you know? And then like, well, it's a thing, you know, that they used to have to do, and then I think it went by the wayside. It was like a traditional thing.
Now we have another therapist for Mark Henry, another sexual therapist.
Right.
The sexual
Yeah.
therapy did not go well on Raw. This time
Right.
it is a male therapist, and again,
Right.
very much in the vulgar era of the.
Yes.
This is a skit that would not happen today.
Yeah.
But in 1999, it fits right in. The male therapist immediately, you could tell he's quite effeminate. He has a lisp.
Yeah.
Very clear what's going on here. A little moment of gay panic. Mark Henry freaks out. And while I will say, like, a lot of it is dated and doesn't hold up, after Mark Henry leaves, and of course, Mark Henry's nickname at the time is Sexual Chocolate, the therapist just goes, chocolate? Sexual, 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 come back. I love that he refers to him by the name. Like, sexual is his first name and chocolate is his last name.
Yeah, I had
Sexual?
a lot of, because when I first
Sexual,
heard
come
that,
back.
when I heard that as a nickname, I just thought like, you know, I remember just making jokes. Is that like, is that his license? Does his license say Sexual Chocolate? Or, you know, it's a clunky nickname that's great. What's your name? Sexual Chocolate. It's just, you know, I don't even know where it came from, but, and I will say this, just something fun, just Mark Henry's natural kind of performance. I did like when the guy's like, you know, he didn't have like typical overacting gay panic. He was like, man, you're gonna need, you know what I mean? He laid out a warning, and that it just was like, yeah, that, you know, that was a big reason for, you know, yeah, he's gonna read poetry, he's gonna go on, you know, and it's good. Again, you gotta, my philosophy always was in these meetings a lot too, was like, which a lot of people I think didn't thought like, oh, this guy just brings the gaga, which is true in a lot of ways, but
You came from Conan. What do they expect?
yeah. Well, also, you know, but philosophically, it makes sense that thing of like, you got big guys like that, they're on the shelf. If they're not going after the title, give them things. They're always going to be able to, you know, get hot and be huge and be pissed. So it's good for them to have, you know, things. It's almost, they have to be, you know, double talented. They have to be good in the ring, big and fierce, because there's nothing worse than like guys who, you know, are not going for the title, and that's the only speed they have, you know, so to speak.
Yeah. So then this leads to a three-way match between the Big Boss Man, Al Snow, and Big Show for the WWF Hardcore Championship, which Al Snow is the title holder going into the match. And what blew me away here was the Big Show hit a flying elbow, which like his athleticism early in his career was so insane. In WCW, he did a moonsault once, I remember. He did like these drop kicks. Just, he was so athletic.
Yeah.
And he did maybe the biggest choke slam I've ever seen on Al Snow during this match. Only for Big Boss Man to sneak in and steal the victory and win the title at the last minute.
Yeah. Perfect. All fun, all great.
Easy.
You know, and that's another thing to talk about this era is, you knew, and it's good for any era, is like, the more you can get over in a great match, the more, you know, that's why you're, you know, writing per se is such a weird word. You're always looking at things that happened, not necessarily for storylines. It's just, but like, you know, oh, that person, we have to put him in the mix because that was such an incredible match, you know, et cetera, you know, and on the other side, sometimes that's when things die. Like, well, that was a dog shit match. Vince hated it. It's over. You know, that those plans are done.
Well, and I think what's interesting is, you know, on the last episode, I mentioned how, like, wow, it really blows me away that the matches are all like 3 minutes. This is the type of match that really only needed to be 4 minutes. If this was a modern day match, it would go through 2 commercial breaks. Nothing would happen. You know, like, just get it over with. Let's go.
Well, and that's a testament to those guys too. And Al Snow, you know, it's got like, he's been around forever, and he doesn't really have like, you know, bad matches. And I was always like glad that, you know, his ECW background, and, you know, that he was not necessarily like a hardcore guy, because he had, you know, lots of talent, and just also, boy, you know, just Al Snow is just one of the, I don't think anyone says anything bad about him except maybe Mick Foley in jest in his books and stuff. But, you know, just like you know, if anything else, Snow probably didn't go farther in his career because he wasn't an asshole. I would put it that way. But he's one of my favorite guys to just talk to and just
Well, he's got that Netflix series now. He's popping off on there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, it all makes sense that where he's gone, because it's just like, I think this is a reasonable, smart, engaging guy, and so
Right.
even for like, oh, who's going to train? Oh, this guy, he's just down to earth and reasonable. Not always the best attributes for a pro wrestler.
Yeah. So now we have a nice parallel angle where Mankind is trying to win the affection of The Rock and be his friend. Stevie Richards is trying to do the same thing to Mick Foley, to Mankind, dressing up like Dude Love. And you have Mankind in the position now where he behaves in his friendship with Stevie Richards the way The Rock behaves with him, where he's big timing Stevie Richards. I thought this was an incredible parallel and so true to like schoolyard friendships.
It's funny you say that, because I remember talking about this in a meeting and saying like, oh yeah, it's like in the playground, someone bullies someone and then they go find someone else. It's like that with dogs too. Like the Chihuahua gets barked and then it goes to the weirder little Chihuahua, and so that's the exact dynamic that was spelled out. So
I thought that was so clever. And then of course, since this guy's trying to mimic Mick Foley, you have him take on Mick Foley's opponent at the pay-per-view, which is Val Venus. Comes out and cuts a promo. I don't remember this era of Val Venus, of like his just monster heel run, of just like his serious heel run. He's still doing the sexual puns. He's saying he's going to be locked and loaded, and he's going to like be hard. It's going to be hard to beat or whatever. But he's just a dick now. It kind of you could see that this character has run its course at this point. That like he could really use like a nice fresh coat of paint for the character. But even still, he beats Stevie Richards. It doesn't need to be longer than 1:20, and then you get the match over for the pay-per-view on Sunday.
Yeah, and this is a crazy thing you say, because it's true, and it's the thing about starting characters and characters being overly gimmicked or gimmick reliant, and they have to morph into something else that's just about their personality. So when you say the characters run its course, that's not untrue, but that was part of the thinking, like, oh, Val Venus is actually super talented, and then and always was a heel, even in even though the gimmick may be overshadowed at first, like it's all like the ladies man thing, and often this is a time-honored thing at WWF, sometimes people being too gimmick heavy, and how do they get out of that into something else. So that was kind of morphing into that way, and then in just this era, man, things fall through the cracks sometimes, and guys don't get pushed because there just wasn't enough slots. It's like a championship team. Like, oh, how did that guy get cut? Like, fuck, just the roster. You know what I mean? So there was nothing, against him or whatever, how his stuff ran its course. It's just sometimes, and generally speaking, that's that's Vince, like, no,
you can see why he was put into right to censor later on. He needed it.
And also, for me, any success I had there, I always had the mindset of like, I'm just here to get everyone over as best I can. I'm not here to judge anything, because there's just, there's enough of that. And, I'm just kind of like, well, here's what can we do to make this, something like, Val Venus could be a monster heel. Absolutely. Here's how you make it work. Make this work. Make this work. I don't like it anymore. Okay. We're on to the next things. That was the way I looked at the job, so to speak.
Yeah.
Even
though your audience is Vince, right? Like your audience isn't necessarily the crowd, the fans. It's more like, how's Vince going to react to this?
And also just, there's definitely that, but just a fixer, just make anything and everything work as good as it can, with more, and no, how about this? No, how about this? Often if you had an idea you thought was good, and here's my rule, and he shit on it or anyone, and you're like, I think that was better. Let me try to bring it up one more time, because maybe I didn't do it good enough. If the second time is no, it's dead. Regardless of inside, you think like, and we'll talk later too, like, oh, I wish that would have gone further. Fuck. I could have made that work great. That could have been great. but you can't belabor it too much, especially the pace of the show, and these shows at this era were just like, breakneck speed left and right.
Yeah, you can't be too precious with your ideas because there's so many more.
Yeah.
And so then we have the continuation of the Terry Runnels Invitational. The Hardys with Gangrel at their side this time. I forgot that they were in the Brood. They switched with Edge and Christian. We also see a sketch backstage of Terry with her $100,000 glued to her body, and she's naked with just money covering herself up.
Right. Nothing wrong with that.
Love the match. Love this feud.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it last week, so there's not really much to add in terms of any changes here.
Yeah, and that's what always looking for a reason why. Okay, reason for the match. However, and that's why I always loved that some of that old school stuff. Managers looking at a free agent. You know what I mean? Just to add a little, something, to these, because like you said before, these two tag teams are super exciting and they're bringing everything to their matches, so sometimes it's unfair to be like, and now these guys, and you're trying to think like, how can they be, they can get heat on each other through whatever happens in a match. But, just this is a little like just a little structure, a little construct, kind of makes it, just have a little more reason, especially for the TV audience.
So then we have the Godfather once again. And I notice on SmackDown, this is broadcast television. It's called The Train. It's not called the Ho Train.
Yeah.
It's just called The Train.
Which is so preposterous because you... Yes, it's just called The Train, but I want everyone to say, pimpin' ain't easy. And then you could, I'm sure you could find it, like some, 12-year-old kid. Pimpin' ain't easy, right, Mom? Yeah.
I love that that's a caller saying, roll a fatty for Big Daddy and tell me pimpin' ain't easy,
So sometimes things like that get in the ear of whether it's standards and practices, and none of this stuff is consistent. So it might be a thing where, someone at USA said, we can't have a thing called the Ho Train. Like, okay, it's the train. And then they either don't see the other stuff or it's just preposterous. Standards and practices on TV is always preposterous.
And so Mideon versus the Godfather, a main event in any arena, is the match here. And this dialogue opening the match, I think, is 100%. I was like, okay, Tommy wrote this. I can't imagine anybody else wrote this but Tommy. So it was the Godfather propositions Mideon to cancel the match, and if he cancels it, he will then have access to the Godfather's ladies. And
like you're a lawyer talking about some horrifyingly salacious thing. He will gain access to the prostitute, and
I don't want to get into the sex trafficking of it all. But Mideon rejects the offer, and he says, "I don't do hoes."
Right.
Got any farm animals? And I'm so sad because he kind of swallowed that line.
Yeah, he swallowed the line, and I know. And in defense of boy, when you're out there and the crowd's hot, to get those kind of and you're asking them sometimes to do these sitcom pauses, if you will, or whatever. It is what it is, and sometimes you're it should have gone like, farm animals, you sick weirdo. No, they're not alive. I'm not sick. What? It was supposed to be
right. That was it. The tag at the end was like, oh wait, I'm not that gross. They're not alive when I do that.
So, but at the same time, with caught up in the excitement and the timing being wrinkled in that era and what have you, it still wasn't like a fumble. It worked
because also Lawler saved it regardless. Lawler's ragging on him after the whole match. The whole match is Lawler ragging on him for having sex with dead animals.
I know.
That little moment too, I think, is very indicative of the time, because watching it now, not that I wouldn't say I was offended or disgusted or whatever, but it was the type of thing where I was like, oh, if I was watching this and my parents were in the room, it'd be a little embarrassing. It'd be like, yeah. But that's what wrestling was.
Kind of more embarrassing. You're watching wrestling with your parents, frankly. I don't think this would have been the moment
to be fair, my dad, if I was in the room with my dad would laugh along. But if it was my mom, she'd be a little embarrassed.
So what would your mom have? Why can't we just have a good old technical match with Dory Funk Jr.? Oh, Ma.
My mom's a real work rate pig.
Yeah. I like Dory Funk Jr. and Nick Bockwinkel, the old, natural men.
And so then we see Triple H being rushed, not to a hospital, but a local medical facility.
Yep.
What is Vince McMahon's apprehension with the word hospital? I'm surprised it was even 25 years ago. And this was something that I always laughed about like 10 years ago.
You know what? I don't know. I might have to ask your words on that one. You might know that one. I know there was like weird things that would come up that we wouldn't get decrees from. And I remember coming up pretty soon, the Hardy Boys had one of their first promos. And I remember, thankfully, and they were like practicing, like, we got the straps or something. And I knew, and it wasn't directly from Vince, but one of the agents, someone said like, oh, don't say strap. That'll set Vince off. But it was just odd. Like, really? Why? And then, so I remember telling them like, don't say strap. Why? It's, because they grew up looking at promos and wanting to emulate, many wrestlers they saw. And I just trust me, it's not worth it to say strap. And so there's those odd things. And even the term wrestler itself became a weird thing. They're not wrestlers, they're superstars. All right. So maybe hospital was one of those. I didn't catch that, but you're right. Local medical facility. And often, what happens sometimes? It might even be just this simple. In the rundown, he might have just said a local medical facility, and someone wrote it down, and the broadcaster's like, well, I'm not going to change that, because who knows, with this wild card, he might go off and be saying, I'm saying exactly what it is, so who knows?
Yeah, like maybe we went to get some Botox, who knows? Not necessarily at a hospital. So then we have our main event.
By the way.
Yes, convulsing. Yes, with China. Very dramatic. And I do like that nobody, like the announcers at no point are questioning him. They're being very sincere, being like, this is awful. Oh no, like our best wishes to Triple H. No one's being like, he's a cerebral assassin. He might be bullshitting us here, folks. We don't want, you don't want to put that out. You want the audience to think that,
right?
You want the audience to yell that at the TV, like, come on, Michael Cole, don't be such a moron. He's lying.
And that's the wonderful thing about wrestling and announcers, and one of my favorite of all time for Gordon Soley, to look him up. His persona was some of the preposterous things that he commented on with this kind of persona. Like, well, that Kevin Sullivan, obviously under some purple haze, under some kind of satanic influence. Just like these ridiculous things that he just said, like a straight line 70s news broadcaster, so that's...
So I was going to say the ending of this match is interesting because as a fan of the Rock and Sock Connection, this is advertised as their last match, but it is for the tag team titles.
Right.
You are sort of rooting for them to win because if they win the titles, they will technically have to wrestle again because they have to defend the titles. Right. But at the same time, the New Age Outlaws are mega hot baby faces. So you don't necessarily want them to lose the titles.
Right.
But ultimately, as a fan, I wanted the Rock and Sock Connection to win the titles more.
Right.
And you mentioned earlier the way the finish went was that the Holly cousins, who are currently feuding with the New Age Outlaws, they came in and behind the referee's back, they cost the New Age Outlaws the titles.
Isn't wrestling wonderful?
Well, here's the thing, though. Didn't the Holly, like, in a way, it kind of didn't make sense because why would the Hollies cost themselves the opportunity to win the tag team titles at the pay-per-view this Sunday? Now that the Rock and Sock Connection are the champions.
They're hotheads. Yeah.
They're hotheads. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I accept it. I accept it.
How about, when I go out there and take that scale and hit them over the head with it,
They don't even care about the titles. They just want their revenge, is what you're saying.
In fact, too bad you weren't there. I would have pitched the next week to be like, hey, with the announcer, this would have been like, how come you didn't do that? It was kind of dumb because you cost yourselves the titles and then just have them beat the shit out of the announcer. what? Just realize how dumb they were, and or beat the shit out of each other. I told you. So it's always fun to add that. That would have been a good thing, but
I love this twist. I absolutely love. Don't let my my annoying brain get it, because I thought this was such a good advancement of the Rock and Sock storyline, because now you open up a whole world of possibilities. Now we can get Rock and Sock versus Edge and Christian, Rock and Sock versus the Heart. They have to defend them now. They could face any tag team, and the Rock is once again stuck with Mick Foley as his tag team partner.
And you know what the big reason for this even kind of dominating the storyline in the show and whatever is, which I loved about this time and about every time, is the pop they got. It's all based on that. The audience forced this storyline, because it would just be like, holy shit, with the birthday party clown and the numbers and the pop was so massive when they went out. It basically was like, well, that's not going to die. You know what I mean? Yeah. Even if people, I think I'd like to go off, whatever kind of sense it made or not. And in fact, even with the New Age Outlaw, it would have been like, New Age Outlaws are at 100 decibels, Rock and Sock are at 120. That was it. It just it was forced. So, which was always fun, because it's like, and that just for the writing process, if you will, you got something like, next week we have open with Rock and Sock, something, and you're like, oh, okay, just do a couple things, because it's going to work, and it's going to be hot, and it's not. It's much tougher when things are like, what are we going to do? We got a problem here, and how are they going to make this guy hot or something? This was all just like, it's like having Barry Sanders on your team. We got 3 running plays. What are they? Who cares? Each lineman gets a defense, and you hand him a draw to Sanders. I'm a coaching genius.
So then we have the show closing angle, which is Triple H returning from the hospital and suggesting that he is going to hand over the title to Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Right.
And Steve Austin comes out. Obviously, nobody's handing over anything. And Triple H attacks him and then rips off the zombie makeup. And Michael Cole is disgusted. Like, oh, my God, I can't believe I can't believe I felt bad for him. Yeah. And then again with the melding of the face and heels here is because Chyna is with Triple H, who is very clearly the top heel in the company, but then Jeff Jarrett attacks her, and Chyna is the face in that angle. So it's very interesting how she's going back and forth here. This is like right before she sort of splits off from him and does her own thing for reasons on screen and off. But I love the show closing angle, the big schmaz at the end. Got me so hyped. Like right now, I am I was almost like, I want to watch the pay-per-view right now. You know, like it was a great way to get the pay-per-view is sold for me.
Yeah, and so many exciting things and that were almost long-term angles. Certainly Chyna, and again, dictating the storyline was like, gosh, she's over so big, and that's super intriguing, and she might be like the first female to compete in the male, title race, what have you, as opposed, so that was very real. And there was there was always talk put the IC title on her. Jeff Jarrett's contract was coming up. So in fact, Jeff Jarrett's contract was up, and I remember Vince saying, I believe he wrestled the pay-per-view.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Jeff Jarrett thing on the pay-per-view show, because there's a big story there. Yeah.
Okay. But that was part of put in with him because he's leaving and drop it to her. So that, that was why this was starting here. And also it was true. There was a lot of hell, babyfaces, heels be damned. People are over. And even a lot of this stuff could have fallen flat if the audiences weren't so hot. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's not about, it's about, covering mistakes or lining things up, but the hot audiences just make everyone's performance better. They make everything just work. And those audience, they're just so hot in that era. The show was just explosive.
It was easy. You didn't have to do much really, right? To get them going.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wonder what made it turn, like when it turned, what started that? Like when did audiences get sick of it? Like when did it stop being hot?
I think, there's a natural course of action, and I always use this flawed angle of a sports team that has a dynasty run. It's gonna run out. You know what I mean? And for the most part, it's like the performers are over, and there's a bunch of them. And this roster is just like, holy smokes! You're going deep into the roster, and it's like an emerging Edge and Christian, and and like even like, oh, the boss, and the money was coming in, the ratings were going through the roof, which smoothed over a lot of things as far as like, everyone wanted it, like no notes from USA, and it was just growing, and MTV had it. They were glad to have it. It was just growing and growing. You need an ambulance to smash in 3 hours? You got it. Let's get a Corvette and pour cement in it. You got it. Money was no object. So it was just, it was the championship run, put it that way, so I don't think you can, it's just bound to run its course.
Well, we are not running its course. We're just getting started here on Tales from the Attitude Era. And this was a fun look back at SmackDown. And now we have the big show, not the big show, but the big pay-per-view event, not Paul White. Yeah. We have No Mercy coming up, and I'm very excited to cover your first pay-per-view with the company. Yeah. This is the big time thing, and we're going to talk all about it. And of course, we want your feedback. You can always follow us on social media, TFT Attitude Era on all socials, and shoot us an email. We'd love to hear your feedback. tftattitudeera@gmail.com.
And questions.
Yes, any questions. And we're going to have some interactive episodes coming up too.
And send us money.
Oh, yeah, we'll take some money.
And gifts. And
drugs, maybe.
Yeah, anything. Performance enhancing podcast drugs.
Excellent.
It's always exciting. I'm always surprised at how much rewatching these, because I really haven't, just how much floods back and how much like, oh, right. And what an exciting time it is, and how the breakneck speed really makes, it just go by so fast. And you said earlier, like, how did you feel sometimes after that, like the last, TV taping, when we had a pay-per-view week, when the pay-per-view's on Sunday and you have Monday Night Raw and then a Tuesday SmackDown, it would be about midnight on Tuesday. Sometimes you just sit there and you'd be like, I can hardly even form words, and you're like, oh, I got to get a rental car or go. Luckily, I traveled with the McMahons and like, pour into some car, go to some hotel. You're just like, where am I? It's just like, it's just, just adds up. It was just such a blast.
Well, I'm really excited to be spending time here, taking a look back at the most exciting period in WWE's history. And we will catch you next time on Tales from the Attitude Era.